In 1969, Native American activists unleashed a rebellion that shook the United States to its core. Alcatraz Island, once the most feared prison in the country, was taken over by a fearless group of indigenous activists, holding it for an astounding 19 months. But this wasn't just a spontaneous act of defiance. Since the mid-1960s, American Indians had been plotting to seize Alcatraz. After the infamous prison closed its gates in 1963, local Native Americans fought tirelessly to turn the island into a thriving cultural center and school for their people. In 1964, 5 brave Sioux even landed on the rock, determined to reclaim it under the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1868, a treaty that gave them the right to take back unused federal land. Their attempts failed, but the dream of reclaiming Alcatraz ignited a revolution, a powerful symbol of indigenous resistance against a government that had long ignored their existence. The fight for Alcatraz became more than just a mission. It became a battle cry, a challenge to centuries of oppression, and a bold stand for justice. In October 1960, when a raging fire burned down San Francisco's American Indian Center, it sparked something even more powerful, a movement. An activist group called the Indians of All Tribes set their eyes on Alcatraz Island, a forgotten patch of land left unused by the government. On November 9, 1969, a small band of protesters, led by a bold Mohawk College student, Richard Oakes, made their way to the island. Though their occupation only lasted one night before authorities kicked them out, Oakes made one thing clear: this was just the beginning. If white men could claim Indian land after a single day of squatting, he told the San Francisco Chronicle, then one day on Alcatraz should establish Indian rights to the island. But they didn't stop there. In the dead of night on November 20, 1969, Indians of all tribes launched a daring final attempt. This time, 89 men, women, and children stormed Alcatraz, ready to reclaim what had been stolen from their people for centuries. It wasn't just a protest. It was a fight for their land, their culture, their future. In the dead of night, shrouded by darkness, a group of determined Native Americans sailed through San Francisco Bay and made history. They landed on Alcatraz Island and boldly declared it as belonging to all the tribes of North America. The government's warnings about the legality of their occupation fell on deaf ears. They were here to stay. Moving into the old warden's house and guard quarters, the activists wasted no time transforming the island. Graffiti began to appear, a powerful statement of their defiance. The water tower proudly proclaimed peace and freedom, welcome home of the free Indian land. Elsewhere, slogans like Red Power and Custer Had It Coming were spray-painted onto buildings. Then came their proclamation, a manifesto addressed with biting sarcasm to the Great White Father and all his people. They announced their plan to turn Alcatraz into a vibrant Indian school, cultural center, and museum. But the real punch? They declared the island theirs by the very same right of discovery used to steal their ancestors' land. In a biting twist, they even offered to buy Alcatraz back for $12,000, a direct mockery of the price once paid for Manhattan Island. This wasn't just an occupation, it was a reclamation. The activists, with biting irony, offered to buy Alcatraz for the same price their ancestors supposedly received for Manhattan, $24 in glass beads and red cloth. They declared that they didn't care that the island was underdeveloped and had no fresh water, as they had already survived far worse on government Indian reservations. Knowing the explosive backlash a violent removal could provoke, President Richard Nixon's administration decided to play a dangerous waiting game. As long as the occupation remained peaceful, the government stood back, watching from the sidelines. Nixon's advisor Leonard Garment, along with other officials, made several trips to the island, hoping to negotiate a peaceful end to the standoff. But the activists were resolute. They demanded nothing less than the deed to Alcatraz Island. The government, bound by bureaucracy, claimed a land transfer was out of the question, so Nixon's administration gambled on time, hoping that the occupation would lose steam and fade away. But the longer the standoff dragged on, the louder the message became. The indigenous people weren't just demanding land. They were reclaiming their dignity, their rights, and their place in a country that had long ignored them. While negotiations dragged on, The Indians wasted no time transforming Alcatraz into a thriving community. We all had things to offer each other, recalled resident Luana Quitquit. Brotherhood, sisterhood. Native American college students and activists from all corners of the country flocked to join the cause, and the population on the island often swelled to over 600. Alcatraz wasn't just an occupation anymore, it was a new home. The residents quickly established a governing council and set up their own mini-society. A clinic, a kitchen, a public relations department, and even a nursery and grade school for the children all sprang up. In a biting mockery of the much-despised Bureau of Indian Affairs, the island's security force proudly named themselves the Bureau of Caucasian Affairs. They patrolled the shoreline, standing guard against any potential intruders. Word of the occupation spread, and soon donations poured in from all over the country, canned goods, clothing, and thousands of dollars in cash. By the end of 1969, the spirit of rebellion was alive and thriving on Alcatraz, turning it into a powerful symbol of resistance and self-determination. As the occupation gained momentum, it caught the attention of some of Hollywood's biggest stars. Celebrities like Anthony Quinn, Jane Fonda, and Merv Griffin made their way to Alcatraz, throwing their support behind the activists. Even the legendary rock band Creedence Clearwater Revival stepped in, donating a boat that the occupiers fittingly named the Clearwater. For most of late 1969, the occupation exceeded the wildest dreams of leaders like Richard Oakes. Alcatraz had become a symbol of hope, defiance, and unity. But by early 1970, cracks began to form. The dedicated college students and activists who had laid the foundation of the movement were slowly being pulled back to their lives. Many had to leave the island to return to school. In their place came wanderers and opportunists, more interested in free rent than fighting for indigenous rights. "Our biggest problems are freelance photographers and the hippies," Oakes said, frustrated. "They stay, eat up our supplies, then leave us to clean up the mess." What had once been a powerful protest was starting to lose its focus, as the spirit of resistance was being overshadowed by those seeking nothing more than a free ride. What began as a symbol of resistance and hope soon spiraled into chaos. Despite an initial ban, drugs and alcohol quickly infiltrated the island, creating deep rifts within the once unified community. The situation took a tragic turn in January 1970, when Richard Oakes' young stepdaughter fell to her death from one of Alcatraz's prison stairwells. Heartbroken and devastated, Oakes and his wife left the island, abandoning it to feuding factions of activists, each vying for control. With leadership in shambles, the occupation began to unravel. By May, the Nixon administration had had enough. Diplomacy had failed, and the government decided to take drastic action, cutting all power to the island, hoping to drive the occupiers out. Just weeks later, a devastating fire ripped through Alcatraz, reducing several of its historic buildings to ashes. The Indians claimed the fire was either an accident or possibly sabotage by outside provocateurs, but the damage was done. The blaze dealt a crushing blow to morale, leaving the once hopeful occupation teetering on the brink of collapse. Despite the increasingly harsh living conditions and dwindling support from the outside world, a small group of determined holdouts clung to Alcatraz for another year. But on June 11, 1971, the government finally made its move. Citing a need to restore the island's foghorn and lighthouse, armed federal marshals stormed the rock and forcibly removed the last of its Indian residents, bringing the occupation to a dramatic end. Although the protesters were driven off in defeat, their 19-month stand had ignited a fire that couldn't be extinguished. The occupation of Alcatraz became a powerful catalyst, galvanizing Indian rights movements across the nation. Veterans of the occupation went on to lead other bold protests at historic sites like Plymouth Rock, Mount Rushmore, and even the Bureau of Indian Affairs. These acts of defiance echoed across the country, demanding recognition and justice. The government, forced to take notice, finally began to heed the calls for Indian self-determination. Alcatraz may have fallen, but the movement it inspired was only just beginning. Even while the occupation of Alcatraz was still in full swing, the tides of change were already beginning to turn. In July 1970, President Richard Nixon delivered a groundbreaking speech declaring, "The time has come for a new era in which the Indian future is determined by Indian acts and Indian decisions. It wasn't just empty words. Soon after, the U.S. government began returning millions of acres of ancestral land to Native American tribes and passed over 50 legislative proposals supporting tribal self-rule. In 1973, Alcatraz reopened as a national park, but the legacy of its Native American occupiers lived on. Graffiti from the protests still adorns several buildings, standing as a haunting reminder of the island's turbulent history. When the National Park Service restored Alcatraz's water tower in 2012, they even made sure to preserve, and in some cases repaint, the powerful slogans left behind by the activists. Today, the rock continues to serve as a symbol of Native American resistance and resilience, a focal point for social campaigns that carry the spirit of Alcatraz forward. The occupation may have ended, but its message endures, loud, bold, and unbreakable. Alcatraz's legacy as a symbol of Native American resistance didn't end with the occupation. In 1978 and again in 1994, 2 nationwide protest walks began at the island, with activists marching across the country demanding justice and recognition. And since 1975, every November, Alcatraz has become the gathering point for an annual Unthanksgiving Day, where people come together to honor Native American culture and celebrate ongoing activism. Thank you for watching and listening. The story of Alcatraz lives on, a reminder that the fight for justice never fades, it only grows stronger.